We turned a corner in the book of Genesis with a very distinct division between chapters 11 and 12. Where chapters 1 through 11 laid out the problem, chapter 12 began to reveal God's plan for the ages to bring a solution to that problem. And God began with one man named Abram. Abram, or Abraham, as he will be called in later chapters, he's called the father of faith, the father of those that believe. But he did not start out that way. There were steps of faith, then there was partial faith, then there was doubt and outright disobedience. His faith was imperfect, just as our faith is imperfect. You and I are also learning how to walk by faith. And though we are people of faith and we trust and we believe in God and we believe in His Son, Jesus Christ, we also falter, we fall, we fail. There's mercy for us, thank the Lord, but we are learning. And Abram, he learned from his mistakes and his lack of faith after taking a detour of disobedience down in Egypt. In his return to the land of promise, Abram made several decisions that were steps of faith towards the Lord that demonstrated his growing trust and faith. We saw in the last chapter, in chapter 13, he returned to worship. He went back to the altar that he had built, and he worshiped the Lord. He called on the name of the Lord. He determined to be a peacemaker when there was contention between his herdsmen and the herdsman of Lot, his nephew. There was some contention and disagreement. He determined to be a peacemaker by allowing Lot to choose which land to take. And in letting Lot choose, he was ultimately letting God choose. He was trusting God in that decision. And then God lifted his eyes and said, look at the land. Here's your land. Walk in it. Walk in the promised land. And he did. He walked throughout the promised land, walking in God's promise. So we've seen Abram develop in maturity and grow in faith. And here in chapter 14, one of the most fascinating chapters in the Bible, Abram continues to exercise faith in God and make a right response regarding Lot and two kings, a right response regarding war and worship. So first, we're going to see a right response regarding war, beginning in verse 1. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these joined together in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Kedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. Basically, an alliance of 4 kings went to make war against a group of 5 kings. Now, when it says kings, these are not kings over nations like we might think of the king of England or the king of France in medieval times. These were kings over what are called city-states. They were formidable people, to be sure, but they were kings over city-states. That's why in a general region, it wouldn't be too hard to get 5 kings in a confederacy or 4 kings in an alliance together. That was necessary in this situation. And in here, the 4 kings that were allied together attacked the confederacy of the 5 kings who had rebelled against them. And this all happened in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. Today, it's known as the Dead Sea. It's in the southeast area of modern Israel on the border of Jordan. The Dead Sea is 32% saline solution. That's about 10 times more than any ocean in the world. And you can actually float on the Dead Sea. When we went to Israel, we went out there and I got to float on the Dead Sea. I'll spare you the photos of that. But the thing is, it doesn't look like it. It looks like a normal lake, and you go out into it, then you kind of lay back and you don't have to be able to swim at all. It will support you. It will keep you buoyant. Well, for 12 years, the cities that were down there on the plain of the Dead Sea and the Jordan Valley, they paid taxes to a king that's mentioned here, Kedorlaomer. In the 13th year, those cities got tired of that and said, forget it. We're done. We're not paying you taxes anymore. So they rebelled. And that's what prompted the attack by the alliance of 4 kings. Continuing, verse 5, in the 14th year, Kedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and attacked the Rephaim in Shetorath Karnaim, the Zuzim in Ham, the Emim in Shaveh Kiriathaim, and the Horites in their mountain of Seir as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to in Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and attacked all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who dwelt in Hazazon Tamar. This guy, Chedorlaomer, was the leader of this alliance of the four kings, and this alliance first came and attacked these tribal groups, 4 tribal groups. Then they turned back and attacked the Amalekites and the Amorites. They were all living in this general area south and perhaps to the east of the Dead Sea. And understand, there were many people who lived in Canaan in the days of Abram who were under the domination of these 4 kings, and they wanted to be free from this domination, like anyone would in this situation. And that's when this group of 5 kings who had been under the domination of the alliance of the 4 kings, they now join the battle. Verse 8. And the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and joined together in battle in the valley of Siddim against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of nations, and then the king of Shinar, the king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. So this group of 5 kings thought this is a strategic time to now join the battle when this alliance of 4 kings is engaged in war with these other enemies. And this battle, it says, took place in the valley of Siddim. Verse 10, now the valley of Siddim was full of asphalt pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Some fell there, and the remainder fled to the mountains. Now, some presumably fell into these asphalt pits. They got caught in tar pits of some kind. Now, it's interesting. The original Hebrew, there's the use of repetition with this word pits. So basically, it's saying that the valley of Siddim was full of pits, like an intense version of that. It gives a sense of the danger of these pits. And this is common in the Hebrew language where an emphasis is put there to express, it's expressed by repetition, that these are pits. And notice where it says the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. So the plan of the group of 4 kings failed. They lost the battle and they fled in retreat. And there's archaeological evidence of the great destruction that the alliance of these 4 kings did to this group of 5 kings. Now, at this point, we're all wondering, what in the world does this have to do with God's developing plan for the ages? What does this have to do with Abram? Well, nothing yet. But his nephew Lot is part of the equation. Lot happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Verse 11, then they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. Verse 12, they also took Lot, Abram's brother's son who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods and departed. Since Lot was living among the wicked people of Sodom, he was also taken captive and he lost everything, at least temporarily. Lot and his family were taken away as captives and probably to be made slaves. So consider the steps that we've seen Lot take over the last couple of chapters. We saw that Lot saw Sodom. He saw the land. He saw that it was good. He saw Sodom. Then he separated from Abram. Then he pitched his tent towards Sodom. He probably thought, well, this is advantageous for my family. The fields are green and lush, and there's a city here, Sodom. That'll be good for business. And so he made a choice for himself and his family. But now he's living in Sodom. He says he dwelt in Sodom. He moved in. It's a wicked city, but he's living in it, and it's only going to get worse when you get to chapter 19. So Lot has taken several steps downward, and now he gets captured. He's in trouble. Verse 13, then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. So we see Abram has some allies here, but this is the first use of the word or the name Hebrew in the Bible. it is probably a reference to the fact that Abram came from beyond the Euphrates River, and he passed over the river to come to Canaan. The word Hebrew comes from a root that means to pass over. Abram passed over the river, thus he was referred to as the Hebrew, the guy who passed over the Euphrates. Verse 14, now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house and went in pursuit as far as Dan. So Abram hears about Lot's captivity, and because Abram was a man of honor and a guardian of his family is taken captive, so he now gets involved. And he goes to fight for his nephew's life and safety. And notice, Abram, he has allies, verse 13, and he arms his 318 trained servants, we see in verse 14. This shows us that Abram is tremendously wealthy, for one, to be able to assemble 318 servants who are capable of fighting in war. He had to possess great wealth. I mean, think about how many servants he had in all. If from among his servants, he could find 318 for battle, to train them for battle. So he had to have at least 1,000 people in his entourage that were with him. So he had great wealth. He was also a man of great prudence. He made sure that these 318 men were trained as soldiers. Abram was a man who walked in faith, yet he was also prudent and practical, and he kept his own personal army, and he kept them trained and ready to defend his interests. And Abram and his army, it says he went in pursuit as far as Dan. Abram's army pursued this alliance of 4 kings for a long distance, heading north to the city of Dan, which isn't far from the northern border of modern-day Israel. In fact, there's a nature reserve there called Tel Dan, which has the remains of the ancient city of Dan. And one of the many interesting things there is they've uncovered the gates of that city from Abrahamic times. In fact, we see that here. That's from Abraham's time, that gate right there. It's part of the Israeli National Park, or the Tel Dan Nature Reserve. And there's even a little stone marker there that points to this verse, Genesis 14, verse 14, talking about this incident where Abram and his army are pursuing as far as Dan. So he made his way all the way up there. He's pursuing these kings. In verse 15, he divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. So Abram, he was a wise and innovative military leader. He divided his forces against them by night. So this is a nighttime attack, which didn't happen much in those days. So this is a nighttime attack with his army split into 2 groups. In verse 16, so he brought back all the goods and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley, after his return from the defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him. So Abram and his 318 trained men, along with his allies, they go in pursuit 150 miles north. They ambush them at night, and they win the battle because of this strategy. They were completely outnumbered, but God gave them the victory. It's kind of one of those Gideon moments where he only went down to 300 men to go into battle. But God got the victory, and he gets the glory in this as well. Now, from what we've read so far about Abram, he's a peacemaker. He's not a troublemaker. He made peace with Lot, and he wants to make peace with the people around him. He formed alliances with his neighbors. But here, this peacemaker goes to war, because sometimes peacemakers need to fight to bring peace. And as the guardian of his family, he goes to war to rescue his nephew and his family. It could be said that Abram loved peace enough to fight for it. Whenever a conflict arises, the easiest solution is to be a pacifist. That's the easy way out. To say, well, I don't believe in fighting for any reason. I don't believe in using a weapon for any purpose. That sounds noble, but it's not. Abram loved peace enough to fight for it. And sometimes you must fight in order to maintain the peace in a broken and fallen world. Francis Schaeffer wrote a lot on this subject, and he said something quite profound when he says, "I am not a pacifist for this reason. For me to be a pacifist in a fallen, broken, evil world would mean that I would desert those people who needed my help the most." And just to put this in a real-life scenario, I'm a dad, I'm a grandfather, and I think, if my son or daughter or my grandson, or if they're being bullied, or if they're being abused, or kidnapped, or even taken hostage in a situation, if that was you, you would do everything in your power to stop that. That's where pacifism breaks down and where activism must be engaged. That you love peace, and in this case, enough to stop evil. So there is a time for war, as Ecclesiastes tells us. And that was Abram's position here. He had 318 trained servants just in case he got into a problem. He says, "I want you to be trained for war." And Abram brought back Lot. He brought back his family and all his goods. And Abram is met now by the king of Sodom. And Lot is going to go back to Sodom. Now, don't you think if God was trying to warn Lot here? I mean, Lot, you first pitched your tent towards Sodom, then you were living in the city of Sodom, then you were taken away as a captive and perhaps sold into slavery. You lost everything, but only by God's hand of blessing. Your uncle Abram came, and God used him to rescue you. You're now set free, Lot. Maybe you shouldn't go back to Sodom. You would think that would be the message, but Lot ignored the warning. He went right back to Sodom. What should have been a wake-up call, he ignored, and he will suffer the consequences with even greater ruin in chapter 19. Now, to be sure, if Lot was not part of this group of 5 kings that were conquered and captured and had all their goods taken, Abram would not have gotten involved in this. But he goes to rescue Lot. And for Lot's sake, Abram organized and executed this rescue operation that was to the benefit also of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and their associated cities. So he, in this sense, also helped them as well. So the king of Sodom and the other kings, they come out to meet him. Abram stepped out in faith to be used of God to rescue his nephew Lot, and Abram's great victory in war restored so much more than of what was taken, as it really just set things right in that area, in that region. So Abram made a right response regarding war. And now the king of Sodom is going to offer Abram great gifts and spoils for his effort in battle. But out of nowhere, another king approaches Abram in what is one of the strangest passages in Scripture. And yes, I've already taught through Genesis chapter 6. So now we come to a right response regarding worship. Verse 18. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And he gave him a tithe of all. This passage doesn't explain where Melchizedek came from, or how he came to be in Canaan, or how he came to be a worshiper of the true God, much less a priest of God Most High. It only says that Melchizedek was there, and that Abram met him on his way returning from his conquest of this alliance of the 4 kings. Who is he? Well, his name, Melchizedek, means, many commentators will say that it means king of righteousness. But the Hebrew grammar of it makes it read, "My king is righteousness." My king is righteousness. My king is Tzedek, which means righteousness. And he is the king of Salem, which 1,000 years later becomes known as Jerusalem. It became a Jebusite city. But Salem, it does mean peace. So my king is righteousness is the king of peace. And it says here in verse 18 that he was the priest of God Most High. He was a worshiper and a priest of the true God, and he ruled over the city that would become Jerusalem. And one of the many fascinating things that makes Melchizedek unique is that he was both a king and a priest. History shows that that's usually a dangerous combination to have religious authority and civic authority. In fact, it was forbidden in ancient Israel. It was forbidden for the kings of Israel to become priests and for the priests to become kings. In 2 Chronicles chapter 26, King Uzziah, a king, tried to do the work of a priest, and God struck him with leprosy to rebuke him. Melchizedek is an exception. He is both a king and a priest. And it says in verse 18, he is the priest of God Most High, El Elyon. It means the highest God. It's like saying he is the supreme being. And Melchizedek is a fascinating example of a worshiper of the true God, even a priest of God Most High. But how did this king in the land of Canaan become a priest? How did he come to learn about God Most High and become a legitimate priest of Yahweh, the covenant God of Israel? Well, notice we also see something else. Melchizedek brought out bread and wine. He served Abram bread and wine, and we all, from our perspective, we understand the significance of bread and wine. We can't help but see this as some kind of foreshadow of what we refer to as communion or the Lord's Supper. Of course, it was Jesus Christ who instituted the Lord's Supper. Jesus served bread and wine to his disciples at the Passover dinner that they ate before Jesus went to the cross, and he instituted with that bread and wine a remembrance, a memorial. But more than a memorial, it was a genuine receiving of the person and work of Jesus Christ. Just as bread is received within someone's innermost being, and just as wine or the fruit of the vine is received by someone who drinks it, Melchizedek served Abram bread and wine. And the way Melchizedek is presented here as priest of God Most High, there is a ceremonial aspect to this, beyond than just giving him some food and drink to refresh him. Now, we don't read anything here about a sacrifice being made, which is what the bread and wine of the Lord's table points us to. That's what every believer remembers when they partake of the bread and the cup of communion. The bread and the cup of the Lord's table points to the perfect sacrifice made by Jesus. But Melchizedek served Abram bread and wine as a priest. And then he does two more things. He blessed Abram and he blessed God. He said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth." Verse 20, "Blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." Melchizedek does what a priest is to do. He's to connect both God and man as a connector, a mediator of sorts. He bestowed a blessing upon Abram, and then he blessed God in the sense of praising God, worshiping him, giving him honor, just as a true priest connects to both God and man. And we do learn more about this Melchizedek in other passages. In Psalm 110, verse 4, it says that the priesthood of the Messiah would be a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. This contrasts with the order of Aaron. Under the law of Moses, which was hundreds of years after the time of Abram, the people of Israel came out of Egypt. They went to Mount Sinai, and from Mount Sinai, God gives them the law. And part of the law is to establish a priesthood through Aaron, the brother of Moses, and that was the priesthood according to Aaron. So there's a priesthood that's according to Aaron, commanded by the law of Moses. And there is a priesthood here according to the order of Melchizedek, which we see here in Genesis 14. And the priesthood of Melchizedek contrasts with the priesthood of Aaron. And the writer to the Hebrews highlights this fact in Hebrews chapters 5, 6, and 7, letting us know that the priesthood according to the order of Melchizedek is far surpassing in honor and glory than the priesthood according to Aaron. Hebrews 7, verse 3 says, it describes Melchizedek as being without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, remains a priest continually. And back here in Genesis 14, Melchizedek is presented to us with no antecedent, no one before him, no father or mother, no genealogy. We don't know anything about him, and in that sense, he is like the Son of God. Now, in his humanity, Jesus had a mother, he had a genealogy, he had beginning of days and end of life, but in his divinity, the Son of God has no father, no mother, no genealogy, no beginning, no end. So there is an analogy to be made with this Melchizedek. And because of this passage and the nature of Melchizedek, many scholars think Melchizedek is an appearing in the flesh as a pre-incarnate form of Jesus Christ, what's known as a theophany or a Christophany of Jesus appearing in the Old Testament. Why? Because he's called the King of Righteousness. He is the King of Salem, of Jerusalem, the King of Peace. He brought out bread and wine, and he's without father and mother, without genealogy, and without length of days. And there are several pre-Bethlehem appearances of the Son of God in the Old Testament. In those cases, he's referred to as the angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar, to Gideon, Joshua, the parents of Samson, and on and on. And in these appearances, there is something divine about the angel of the Lord. And these appearances are understood to be the Son of God before his incarnation. And based on this, there are many scholars who think that Melchizedek was just such an appearance, that this was not a mere man who met Abram, but the Son of God appearing in human form before he was incarnated in Mary's womb and born in Bethlehem. Well, one more thing we need to look at. Verse 20 says that he gave him a tithe of all. That's Abram gave Melchizedek a tithe of all. Abram gave to the Lord, and he did it through giving to Melchizedek a tithe of everything. Now, this refers to 1/10. That's what the word tithe means, 1/10. But he's giving 1/10 of his assets, not his income. Abram voluntarily gave out of his assets all that he had, and he did it just this one time. This is not a continual thing that we see happening, but he does this one time. Understand, giving tithes is a symbol of worship. It is worship. It's worshiping the Lord with our finances, and it's a symbol of submission. Abram gave to the Lord by giving it to Melchizedek, and he gave voluntarily, and he gave it worshipfully. In the covenant that God would make later with Israel, a tithe was commanded. You see through the Old Testament law that there were many tithes, and when you add it all up, it came up to 23.33% of their income was given as a tithe overall. But Abram's giving to Melchizedek, giving a tithe of all, shows that the principle of the tithe predates the Old Covenant, and it's not restricted to the law of Moses. Yes, God had the tithe as part of the Old Covenant, as part of the law of Moses, but that's not where the principle of tithing began, nor can we say that that's where the principle of tithing ended. It's not restricted to the law of Moses. Now, under the New Covenant, the tithe is not emphasized, at least in my understanding from the reading of the New Testament passages that talk about giving. Now, Jesus, he endorsed tithing. He praised the religious leaders for their faithful tithing, but he also warned them about tithing with the wrong heart. And when the writer to the Hebrews expresses the idea of Abram tithing to Melchizedek, it is put in a positive way. So when the New Testament does mention the tithe, it mentions it in a positive light, yet there isn't a clear command or even an emphasis on tithing, but there is the idea of proportional giving. That's clearly stated in 1 Corinthians 16, where Paul gives instruction on the collection of financial offerings in the church. We read in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2, on the first day of the week, let each one of you lay aside something, storing up as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come. As you prosper, so give. That speaks to proportionality. So the proportion that you've been blessed with, that's how you are to give as you prosper. And if we're going to give proportionately, in my personal belief, my conviction is that 1/10. That's a valid goal or measure of a proportion to give. It's a good starting point. And as one of the early Christian writers once said, we're not under the tithe, we can give more. It's not a limit on our giving either. I think it's a goal to aspire to, but we also understand we don't give to get. That's bad theology, to give to get. We give because we're to give cheerfully. We want to. We understand that all that we have belongs to God anyway. I'm just giving some of it back to Him. And I give to the Lord through the church that we're a part of. That's where my primary giving goes to. But we give to the Lord, and Abram, he is giving to bless Melchizedek and the Lord. There's another thing to consider about Abram tithing to Melchizedek. Hebrews 7, verses 4 through 10, finds significance that Abram, the ancestor of the Jewish people, including the tribe of Levi, honored Melchizedek with his tithe. This shows Abram's recognition of Melchizedek's superiority. This is understood to mean that Melchizedek's order of priesthood was greater than Aaron's order of priesthood, which descended from Abram. That means that Jesus is a greater high priest than Aaron or any priest who descended from Aaron, because he belongs to the superior order of priesthood. Jesus Christ is the high priest according to the order of Melchizedek, not according to the order of Aaron, which was established some 500 years later when God gave Israel the law and the sacrifices and the instructions for the priest and the tabernacle. I know, I still haven't answered the question. Who is this Melchizedek? I could spend 3 hours giving you some pros and cons of several theories. I won't today. Some say it's Shem, the son of Noah. And people I respect that say it's Shem, there's no biblical support for that. It's just an idea that people have. Some say it is a Canaanite king who is monotheistic by some supernatural revelation from God. And if you read it at face value, that's what it looks like. It's a king from a geographical place of Salem, and it's in the land of Canaan. That's at face value. The other theory, as I said, some say it's Jesus Christ, a theophany or Christophany, a pre-incarnate form of Christ appearing in the flesh. Those are three fascinating interpretations. Well, what's yours, Pastor? After all this week, I would have to say I don't know. For most of my Christian life, I would have said, well, it's a theophany. That's got to be Jesus. There's too many parallels. It can't not be him. But then I've read some other things recently that's like, well, maybe not. Here's what I can say with absolute confidence. At the very least, Melchizedek was a remarkable type and picture of Jesus Christ. And there's no one else listed in Scripture who is in this order of Melchizedek. It's this guy here in Genesis 14 and Jesus, the Messiah. So I'll let you do your own research on the rest of all that. But here's Abram. He received a blessing from this Melchizedek. He receives bread and wine, and Abram tithes to Melchizedek as worship unto the Lord. He is worshiping the Lord through this interaction with Melchizedek. It is a right response regarding worship. We're not done. Verse 21. Now the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons and take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the Lord, God Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, except only what the young men have eaten and the portion of the men who went with me. Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. It was entirely proper for the king of Sodom to reward Abram for all that he did in recovering what was taken by the alliance of 4 kings. And he offered Abram a tremendous amount of plunder. This was everything that was of value that was taken from several prosperous cities. And he said, Abram, it's all yours. Keep the spoils. Just give us the people in return. And Abram was resolute in his response. He says, I will take nothing from you. I will not receive any of the goods that I recovered that were taken from Sodom and Gomorrah. Why? Well, it says he made a vow to God Most High, which is the title that he just heard Melchizedek used, that he used, and he uses that same title. He made a vow to God Most High. So it seems that he had taken an oath before this battle, maybe something like, Lord, I'm about to go fight these kings. I know I'm outnumbered, but if you give me the victory, I promise to give you all the glory for it. And if he were to take money for this from these kings, then people could say, oh, that's why he did it. He did it for the money. He did it for the financial reward. He would never want that said. So he said, I made a vow to God Most High. I've raised my hand to the Lord and told him, I'm not going to take anything from man. And it's possible that Abram made this vow because of what happened when he went down to Egypt. The king of Egypt enriched Abram, and maybe it didn't sit well with him. Abram went down to Egypt in unbelief. He lied to Pharaoh while he was there, and God miraculously preserved him, and his testimony was negatively affected there. He left there with great riches that the king of Egypt gave him, adding to the riches Abram already had. And it's like maybe that all left a bad taste in Abram's mouth. And he said, you know what, I'm never doing that again. I'm never going to look at man or accept any gifts from their hands. I'm not going to do that again, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, which is what Abram said to the king of Sodom. Abram didn't want the king of Sodom to be able to say, hey, you know that rich guy over there, Abram, how wealthy he is? I made him rich. He refused any portion of the plunder because he didn't want it to give anyone a reason to say that a man had made him rich, especially the king of Sodom of all places. Abram determined that all the credit for his success and wealth should go to God and to God alone. He had decided to live so that whatever outward success he gained in life, anyone could see that it was because of the blessing of God, not because of from the generosity of any or the help of any man. Listen, this is a wise way to live, and it's a wise way to serve the Lord. If success, or what I would call, in parentheses, apparent success, because I'm talking about success that only appears to be success in the eyes of man. There's a lot of success that the people of God can have that doesn't look like success in the eyes of man, but it is in the eyes of God, where people don't see it. But if apparent success comes by man-centered methods and strategies, then it's difficult to confidently say that the blessing came from the Lord. I mean, we see that with some, not all, but some prominent leaders or what have been called celebrity pastors, people who have an enormous marketing machine behind them. They have massive social media platforms and teams of people that promote them with brilliant marketing and business strategies, and people who are raised up to prominence and seem to have apparent success so that people will say, well, that we know that was the Lord. I mean, look at how blessed they are. Maybe it was just good marketing. Abram didn't want that. Abram wanted what I think we should all think, and that is, it's better to rely on God's methods and God's wisdom, so that if any quote apparent success comes, then God receives the glory for it, and everyone sees it. Well, that was God that did that. We should endeavor to serve God in such a way that whatever success we have, it has the fingerprints of God all over it, not the assistance of man. So Abram refused the plunder from the king of Sodom, not because it wasn't due him. In fact, at the end of verse 24, he says, let them take their portion. He does not impose his own principles on his allies who helped him. All those who fought with Abram, they were entitled to the spoils, but Abram refused the plunder from the king of Sodom because he didn't want any man to be able to say that they had enriched him, that they had made him well, and he wanted everyone to know that it was the blessing of God. So, hey, let them receive the spoil that they should receive, and let God get the glory for his great work. This is also worship to the Lord. giving God the glory for all that he had done. So Abram continues to develop in maturity and to grow in faith. He makes a right response regarding war by going into battle and to rescue Lot, and God gives him the victory. He makes a right response regarding two kings that were a demonstration of his worship of the Most High God. And we see God working through Abram to rescue Lot in a way that is very similar to how he would later work to rescue his people through Jesus Christ. You could say that the account of Abram's rescue of Lot is an analogy of our salvation. You were captured in sin and shame, and you were rescued by the one who left his safety and went into great trouble and to great lengths to rescue you. And with great courage, he defeated a mighty enemy and took all the enemy's spoil. Jesus did that on the cross for you. And like Abram, Jesus took nothing from man in his victory over sin and death, because Jesus went to the cross alone with no assistance from anyone. The only people there to give him any kind of help or any kind of aid were the women who were there at the cross weeping at the cross. And he took nothing from man in his victory over sin and death. Jesus said, I don't want any man to get the glory for this. All the glory goes to my Father in heaven. And he says, I'll do this without any help from anyone else. And Jesus won that victory over sin and death. What a wonderful and glorious thing. I hope you have received that. I hope you are walking in it. And I hope that even as it blessed Abram and as Abram received it, I pray that you have received the blessing from the Lord Jesus Christ and what he did for you, especially what he did for you at the cross. Let's pray together.